This presentation of In Their Own Words is brought to you by the Honor Project and is dedicated to the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces.
1994 was the 50th anniversary of D-Day. Throughout that year, we sat down with dozens of veterans of the Normandy Invasion to hear their stories and to put these heroes of our nation on record. Owen B. Hill was a member of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. He liked to be called OB, and he was a sergeant in the headquarters company of the 1st Battalion. The 508th was one of 4 regiments of the 82nd Airborne Division. I had a memorable conversation with OB. He openly discussed his training and combat experiences, and he eloquently expressed his thoughts on the nature of war and what it did to him and his fellow paratroopers.
I'm OB Hill from the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment during World War II. We were attached to the 82nd Airborne through all the operations in Europe.
During that period, what was your rank during the D-Day discussion?
I was a sergeant at that time, a battalion message center chief.
First of all, we're going to talk about what your arrival to England and getting ready for this invasion. When did you get into to camp in England? How did you get there?
We landed, when we first went overseas from New York, we landed in Ireland, and we were at Port Rush and Port Stewart, Ireland for about 45 days. Then we went to England, through Scotland, and rode the train down to Nottingham, England, and arrived there in the dead of the night, midnight, and everything blacked out, of course. And we were loaded into trucks and buses and taken to Wollaton Park, which was a very, very nice section of Nottingham.
When was this? What time of year?
It was in March of 1944.
And you'd finished your airborne training by then in the United States? And
Yes, I had finished jump school in September of 1942, and from there I stayed at Fort Benning and went through communication school and the first class of advanced communication school, and then went through demolition school at Fort Benning. And then I was put aside until the 1st Battalion of the 508 finished jump school, and I was transferred then to the 508.
You get to England. What did you think England was going to be like? Did you have any anticipation, any thoughts?
I had very little knowledge of England other than what I'd seen in books during high school. Back that time it was unheard of for an ordinary family to be able to go to Europe. Here I am on an all-expense-paid trip. It wasn't all joy, but I did have the opportunity to go.
What was the troop transport like? Describe that for me, getting across there.
The transport going across, we were on a very small ship. There wasn't room for the whole regiment to get on there. There were 2,200 of us, and part of the regiment had to be on another ship. And it was in December, and crossing the Atlantic in December is not best at, not good under any conditions. And our little small one, we were half underwater, I swore, half the way across. I think I got seasick the day I got on board, and I didn't get over it until I got to Ireland. In Ireland, there at Fort Rush, we were still training, very rigorous training every day, and many problems at night. We were out in the, I always call it the Tules or the boondocks, meaning that we're away from all civilization and out on our own in the countryside. And in Ireland, it's mostly, in that part of Ireland, it was mostly peat bogs. You step on the ground and go into your knees in the peat bogs. So it was very rugged trying to cross the countryside.
And what kind of training were you doing? What were you learning?
We were given night problems to attack a certain spot on the map and simulate that we were in combat and that we were trying to take this village or this bridge or whatever the objective was for that night. And during that time of the war, everything was blacked out, of course, even the cities. So it was totally dark wherever we went.
Did you do much jumping at all once you were in country?
We didn't make any jumps in Ireland at all. We did make 2 night jumps in England.
Okay.
Not everyone made the second jump in England because somehow or other the Germans had interfered with the radio communications, and some of them the jump was called off. The others of us who jumped, we were many miles from where we were supposed to be when we landed.
So let's go down to England now. How you got into to Nottingham area?
Yes, to Nottingham. As I said, then we moved to Walton Park, which is a very big open area right at the edge of the city of Nottingham. And Walton Hall, everybody of us in our group thought it was a castle because it's a big monstrous building. But the Britishers tell us that's Walton Hall, not a castle. But it's a beautiful place. It sits right on top of the hill where we were.
Now, were you staying with English families or in these fancy halls or in tents or?
We rarely ever got in that fancy hall. That was a museum, and very few of us even went in there, even when we had time. We were in Tent City. Tents spread all around in front of the Walton Hall on the hillside. The 1st Battalion, 2nd and 3rd and regimental headquarters. We even had a guardhouse, which was a tent in that area.
Did you get to meet many of the English people?
Yes. I always say we were the luckiest of all the troops that got sent to England. The city of Nottingham was absolutely fantastic. The people there were just friendly no matter what we did. Many times since the war I've said that we were a loud, boisterous, obnoxious bunch. We'd go into the pubs and drink up all their booze in 30 minutes that they had allotted for all day. We yelled at their women. We just made noise and were absolutely obnoxious, in my opinion. But the Britishers accepted us. We were invited into their homes, and it became a very, very nice way of life. It was our first time to be stationed any place like that, where we could mingle with the citizens, and it was a very good experience. As I said, the British people were just overly nice to us. There was one family their name was Anderson. He was in the Canadian Army during World War I, and he stayed in England. And I met them in a pub, and they invited me to their home, and became very good friends with them. And I would liberate some things from the mess hall, ham and some fruit, flour and sugar, things that they couldn't get normally, and take that to Mom Anderson. And I had apple pie occasionally, and had baked ham, had meals like my mother used to make. And many of the guys did the same thing. It was just normal that the British people took us into their homes.
These people had been in war and been under the difficulties associated with war for many years already. Why do you think they were so open?
The British people, you have to be around them a while to really understand them. They're a different breed. They are very rugged. All of the rigors that they had during the 4 years of war that they had before we got there didn't seem to have any effect on them at all. They referred to the battle at Dunkirk as a little skirmish, and that'll give you some idea of what their feelings were. They just never did get their spirits down. They were always up, and they always knew in their own hearts that this was all going to come out for the best when it was over.
Did it seem like there were more Americans in England than there were in America? I mean, did it seem like that?
It sure did. On downtown Nottingham on a weekend particularly, the streets were absolutely packed with men from the 508, and the 507th Parachute Infantry was also stationed on the other side of Nottingham, and they were downtown, and many of the Air Force men were downtown Nottingham. It was just like being at home if you walked down the streets, because we outnumbered the Britishers 4-1.
Well, that must have made you feel pretty good, though, to get accepted that quickly by these people.
It sure did. I don't think anyone really got homesick as a result of that. The Anderson family, I felt they were my family when I was there. I could go to their house. I didn't have to knock on the door after the first 2 or 3 visits. I lived there.
Was it unique to you, or do you think other guys had the same?
Many of the guys had the same experience with different families in different parts of the area there. There's a little town of Beeston, which was right behind our camp. Many of the men went back there rather than going to downtown Nottingham, and they had families there. one 12-year-old boy came there regularly and got laundry from the regimental headquarters crew. His mother did their laundry and sent it back to them all washed and ironed very neatly. And they would give him items from the mess hall which they couldn't get at their family.
What was a day in the life of the 508 for you? What was that like?
I was up early in the morning, having reveille at 6 o'clock, and back right straight to the mess hall for breakfast, and then calisthenics. And we usually always had a problem of some sort during the day. If we were in camp, there was always a problem of some sort. By problem, I mean we were marched out into the field to, again, simulate taking a bridge or simulate taking a section of the forest, and just staying in good physical condition, really, and learning how to keep reading our compasses without any errors, how to read maps, and we would have times when we would divide ourselves up. Part of us would be the enemy and part of us would be the good guys, and we would attack each other in the woods to simulate another battle.
Did you have any idea what you were training for?
Oh, we knew that we were training for an invasion somewhere. That's the very nature of the parachute troops, is to be the first in, to be the invaders, and to go someplace where you know you're going to be behind the enemy's lines. Our regular problem was to drop onto an area and secure a series of bridges or and simulated airfield or something of this nature. Airfields were always a good problem because if we landed someplace and secured an airfield, then they could bring in reinforcements easily by the big cargo planes. So we simulated that problem regularly.
But you knew that you were going to be going over the channel at some point.
We knew we were going, we did not know where. Not until the last week.
What did you think about when you thought about the Atlantic Wall, Fortress Europe? Sounds pretty intimidating.
It was intimidating, and I'm sure that there were many anxious moments. I had some. I'm sure everybody did. But like everybody else, I had faith in the guy next to me, and he had faith in me. We were all trained to the very nth degree. We couldn't have had any better training than we had. We had good equipment. We all had the right spirit, and it was just going to take one hell of a good enemy to keep us from doing what we were supposed to.
When you're getting closer and closer to what we have had, what's become known as D-Day, when did you find out when to get ready? When did you learn that the invasion was going to take place, say early June? When did you start to find these things out?
One Saturday night, in the middle of the night, they loaded everybody up in trucks and took us to the airfield. We went to Folkingham Base. That's where our troop transport command was. And then we found out where we were going. Up until then, we did not know. We had gone to the airfield before and to make jumps, and it was always a secured thing. No one knew where we were going or what was going to happen. But this time it was a different feeling. We knew in our own hearts that this was the real thing, that there was no more playing around and no more solving problems in the woods. We were going to do the real thing this time. And it was a different feeling. I'm sure there were anxious moments, but I don't think anyone was really terrified. We were ready to go on the night of the 4th, but the weather conditions called it off for one day, so we were postponed for one day.
What did you do that night? Where did they berth you? What did you do?
There were no buildings on this airstrip where we were, except for one big hangar building. We had tents that we lived in, and this hangar building had a poker game going in one corner and a crap game going in another corner, and it had church services in another corner, and they were showing movies in there all at the same time. And everybody was in good spirits. They were talking and laughing in the poker games and the card games and the crap games. The movie, I'm sure, was good. I remember going to the movie, but I couldn't have told you what it was. But one of our men swears he remembers what it was, Davy Jones, who was in my company. He said that the movie they showed that night was the littlest angel with Margaret O'Brien, and there's no one will deny that happened. Dave's the only one who remembers, I guess.
So what was the mood? Seemed pretty good, though, huh?
Yes, everyone was in good spirits. Even in the church service, there was no signs of any fear or any regrets that they had joined this outfit. They were there to do a job, and they were ready to do it. They couldn't have had any better spirit than what we had that night.
Now you had the mission explained to you as some sort of a sand table or something. Tell me about what your objective was.
The intelligence section built these sand tables. I guess they were 8 foot long and 8 foot square probably. And they had made the top of the sand table in scale to what the land was where we were supposed to land. They showed the Mer de Rey River, which is alongside Chef DuPont. It showed the bridges where we were supposed to take them, and it showed the area of the countryside that we were supposed to secure and hold. And we studied that table every chance we had. We went in there to look at that table some more. And I think every man in the unit was very familiar with what was to be on the ground where he landed.
Before you left, did you write any last-minute letters home, anything, wife?
I wrote letters fairly regularly to my wife. I don't think I mentioned, I know I didn't mention anything about this because it was, our letters were censored at that time. And we were warned not to mention anything about where we were or what we were doing. It was just a normal friendly letter.
After that one-day delay, Obie Hill and his fellow paratroopers boarded their transport aircraft on the evening of June 5th, 1944.
So you went in full battle gear, you were ready to go?
Yes. We took everything with us. We had access to all the ammunition and hand grenades or whatever we wanted. There was plenty of it there. All you could carry, you took. I carried my M1 rifle, and I had a .45 pistol, and I had a lot of ammunition, a lot more than was allotted amount, but there was lots of it there to take, and I didn't see any reason to leave it there if I could carry it, so I took it. I had hand grenades. I had a gammon grenade. I had 2 gammon grenades. Those are British grenades. I had a phosphorus grenade because I had some equipment that if I was captured, I was supposed to destroy it, the code converter. I was going to destroy it with this phosphorus grenade. When I got into the plane, I couldn't climb the steps. I had to be pushed. I had too much equipment on me. I couldn't take my reserve chute, for example. It wouldn't have done any good anyway, so I left it. I couldn't take the Mae West, which was to keep us floating if we landed in the channel. I had to leave that. I left my gas mask and filled the gas mask case full of cigarettes. But I took all the things that I thought was essential.
So you're on this airfield. Was it dark?
It was still light. The night of the 5th when we loaded into the planes, this was, I'm guessing now, about 9 o'clock because we flew for 4 hours before we got together. All the planes got together, assembled in the proper order. And so we were flying around when it was still daylight. And then when they all got assembled, we went to the south and came back towards France, across the Jersey Islands, and we started getting anti-aircraft fire from there. And then when we hit the coast of France, there was a lot more anti-aircraft fire, and the clouds there caused us to caused the pilots to spread out, and consequently we were not dropped in a proper place. A few planes landed exactly where they were supposed to, but they were very few.
Now you're flying over and you're about to jump out. What's the feeling that this is finally going to happen? What's going through your stomach?
I don't think that anyone was petrified with fear. They were all anxious, of course. That many of them have said that was one jump they were happy to make because of all this flak coming up at the airplanes, and they didn't want to go down with the plane. But I don't think anyone was really terrified. We'd been trained to expect this, and I don't think anyone was really surprised.
Did you guys do anything like, I saw some films where people painted like war paint and stuff like that?
Yes, we had used burnt corks and blacked our faces and to keep from being shown up at night so well.
Now you, what's the flight over? Is it too loud to talk inside, or people?
No, you can talk. You have to talk a little louder than normal, but you can talk to each other without any problem.
And what are you talking about?
Oh, just normal conversations, really. It wasn't concerning the invasion or anything like that. They didn't talk about that. They avoided that topic, evidently. Everybody did. It was just a normal, friendly conversation. A lot of laughter, nervous laughter, but it was laughter nonetheless. When we did jump, I looked down and I could see the river. I said, well, that's the Normandy River, I'm close. And I landed in the floodwaters. It was only, when I stood up, it was about this deep then. It's just above my waist. And but on the way down, the Germans were shooting at me, and they hit the gas mask that was on my side. That spun me around. I don't know how high we were, not very high, because it didn't take long to get to the ground. It seemed like forever with all these tracers coming up at you, but it wasn't that high. And they were still shooting at me when I hit the water. And when I stood up, they were shooting again, so I went back down and had just my nose and my head sticking out to try to breathe. So it was a different experience.
It was under dark, it was in dark, right?
Yes, it was 1:25 in the morning.
Okay. So you've jumped out and there's tracers, they're shooting at you, and you actually get hit in the gas mask and you land. And
yes.
Are you disoriented? What's happening? Do you know where you are?
When I landed, I was still sure that was the Normandy River, or at least I thought it was, and I knew which direction I had to go if that was the river, and I took off in that direction. Found out later that I was going in the right direction, but I was about one of the few that did. The ones in my plane were all either on the other side of the river or in the river, and because I was the last one out. I had traded places with my platoon leader. Normally, I would have jumped behind the company commander as number 2, and the platoon leader and our company commander were very good friends. And the platoon leader asked me if I would trade places with him, so I did. I went to the last one out instead of the second one out. I was number 17.
That's how many were on the C-47?
Yes. When we stood up to hook up, I couldn't hook up my line, and the one in front of me couldn't either. There was only room for 15 of us with all of our equipment to get from the door back to the cockpit of the airplane. So the 2 of us were up in there with the pilot, squeezed in there, and with the pilot and the co-pilot. And then when they gave the order to jump, as we went out, then we hooked up before we got to the door.
Okay, now you're sailing and you're landing on French soil. Describe the German resistance. What was that like? What were you up against?
The shooting at me there in the water continued for, I'm guessing again, I would say for 10 to 15 minutes. It seemed like much longer, but I don't think it was. I think maybe 15 minutes was the maximum. And they evidently assumed that they had gotten me because I didn't make any moves. And when everything quieted down, I waited what I considered to be appropriate amount of time, and I started moving towards the shore, and got to there without any more problems. And I got my equipment assembled and all hooked on my belt, and so I could go ahead and take everything with me. And I started walking then in the direction that I thought should be going. And I heard noises coming from my left, so I stopped and I laid down on the ground. And when I laid down, then I realized I was right by a ditch, and I could hear this noise coming from my left, and it was people walking. I had no way of knowing whether it was our men or Germans, so I didn't make a sound. They passed right in front of me, and as they just got past me, one of them spoke to the other, and it was German. So I had been within a patting distance. I could have patted them on the head, but I didn't, of course. I assumed that they could hear my heart beating, but I don't think they did. They passed, and after I considered it was the right amount of time, I got up then and jumped this ditch and continued on the direction I started. And I was challenged with the word of the day, which was flash, and I couldn't think of the password. I said, "Oh shit," and it was Bill Brown, one of my corporals, and he laughed a bit, and we got together and compared notes. And both of us decided that we were going the right direction. He had been going the same way I was. So we continued on then in that vein, going on down in the direction that we were going, towards what we thought was Chef DuPont.
So Bill was his name?
Bill Brown.
Bill was the first American you had seen so
Yes.
far? Did you feel kind of lonely until then?
Yes, yes. But that wasn't really unusual. Many of the jumps that we made in practice at night, particularly, we were dropped in the wrong place many times, so it wasn't unusual to be alone for the first few minutes on the ground. And especially here, since I had landed in the water and stayed there for a time, I figured, well, everybody who landed there where I had, if they landed on the dry ground, were already gone. And that's probably true, because there were others in that area, we found out later, that had landed in that same section.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about this code word thing again. You're supposed to, someone challenge you?
Oh, the word of the day was flash, and I was supposed to say thunder, and I didn't. I said, that's when I said, oh shit, and Bill recognized my voice because I was his sergeant.
And okay, so good thing you recognized your voice.
Yes.
Then, huh? So then, what was the story with the little crickets that everybody?
The crickets. Everybody had one. We were supposed to use those. If we heard a sound, we were supposed to click those crickets, and if it was a friendly man on the other end, he would click his back at us. And some of them used those. I didn't use mine that night. Whether I forgot it or whether it just the situation didn't arise, but I never did use mine. But they worked.
So it was in lieu of shouting out flash.
Yes.
Thunder. Oh.
Yes.
And that was the word of the day. How did you find out about the word of the day?
They gave us that when we left England. That was beat into our heads so that we wouldn't forget it. But I did. I wasn't alone, I found out at one of our reunions, because Colonel Mendez forgot it too. So I was in good company, because Mendez was one of our best officers.
So you get together and then you head out from there with...
Yes, we picked up, I'm guessing now again, because I didn't keep count, but I would say 9 or 10 men, and we got to a crossroad and ran into a bunch of Germans there. We had a bit of a firefight, and we drove them off. I'm guessing too that we were outnumbered probably 3-1 there, but we either had more spirit than they had, or were better trained or something, because we drove them off. And we wiped out a few, and the rest of them ran. So we continued on then, and we picked up a few more strays along the road, and at another crossroad we ran into the Germans again. Not sure that it's the same group. I'm sure that it wasn't, because they were going the other way. But once again, we had this firefight with them, and we drove them off. And then we got to a little town which we later found out to be Boozeville. And then we knew that we weren't on the Meurthe River. The river we had landed in was the Douve River, and we were off course. But we were still going in the right direction, but it was pure accident that we were. We got to Boozeville, and there were some Americans on the other side of the road in behind the buildings at this town, and Germans on both sides of us, to the right and to the left. So we had a bit of a firefight with the Germans, mostly on the right side of my crew, the left side from the other side of the road. And we were able then to cross the road after we drove them off and get with the big group. And we had, Ray Hummel and I both agreed it was 52 men at that time. And we had men from the 504, or not from the 504, they had the 505 and the 507, and some men from the 101st. Now the men from the 101st had been dropped probably 15 miles from where they were supposed to land, but they were there with us too. But all of us had the same type of training, and we all had equal amount of faith in the one to our right and left, no matter what unit he was from. Our training had been somewhat different, I'm sure, along the way, but it was all the same type. So we felt like we were a pretty good group.
Those fights at the crossroads, that was your first time in your first experience with combat?
Yes. First experience where I could shoot back. I was shot at, of course, on the way down and after I got in the water, but this was the first time that I could really fight back. It was a different experience. I don't know that anyone was ever really ready for that, but it was something we had to do.
How did you react to it? Was it instinct, or how did you deal with it?
I think we just all automatically did what we had been trained to do. Started finding the enemy and shooting at them and wiping out as many as we possibly could.
Was it a confusing situation, or was it clear to you? Did it come very clear as to what?
We didn't know, of course, how many were there, but we had no choice. They fired at us, and we had to defend ourselves. And we were fortunate that there wasn't any real large group. It wasn't a division or anything. If they had been, they would have just run over us. But as it was, we were able to drive them off. And it was an experience I'll never forget. It's not normal to sit there and, on the ground and shoot at somebody across the road. I wasn't raised that way. I was trained that way in the Army, but when that time came, my background came back too. We were not a really religious family, but we always went to church, and we had quite a strong faith, and that faith was there that day.
In what way? What do you mean?
I knew that it wasn't the thing to do if you were in a normal situation, but this wasn't a normal situation. You either had to shoot them or they were going to shoot you, and so you went ahead and did it.
At that point, did any of your had you lost any of your friends from your unit?
Yes, on the way down to where we got the group together, we had lost 4 men in these 2 different firefights, and we lost 1 when we got down to where the other group was. So we had lost 5 by the, I guess, 10 o'clock that morning.
How did that affect you? What kind of?
It's infuriating. You get absolutely irate because a couple of them were pretty good friends, and you sort of lose control. You're not human. You get to where you'd like to just jump up and wipe out the whole crew. You know you can't do that. You have to take your time and do it methodically, but you get so absolutely mad that you feel like jumping up and running right at them. You can't do that. It's a good thing we were trained not to. Because I'm sure many of them had that same feeling. I'm normally a pretty peaceful character, and but when I get mad, I lose control, and I had almost done it that day. I think that it's had an effect on me ever since that day, yes. I'm not sure in what way. It's made me more compassionate, I think. I'm more considerate of others, I hope. Anyway, I think I am. I try my best to see the other person's point of view before I react. I don't always do it, but I try to. And I still think back on those days regularly. It's been 50 years, and it still comes back, and the memory is very vivid. Seeing the friends killed, yes.
With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Too busy with your end-of-summer goals to cook but want to make sure you're eating well? With Factor, skip the extra trip to the grocery store and the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, then get back to crushing your goals. Level up with Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
And seeing that, did you yourself feel as though your time had come up? Did you feel in a situation where it was going to end for you?
I don't remember ever thinking that. I never had really had time to think that my time was there. I was thinking what I had to do next and what was the best way to get rid of the enemy across the road. And I don't think I ever worried about being killed at that time. There was a time later that in one situation where I had some time to think, and then I thought back at, in my hometown there's this square, and they put the names of all those who were killed in World War I up there on Memorial Day, and I could see my name up there as one of them from World War II on the next Memorial Day. And I thought of home, and when that happened, Ray Hummel and Ray was the ranking non-commissioned officer in our group. He was a staff sergeant, and I was next in command as a sergeant. We had no officers, and after we got across the road and all of us were together, we wondered what was around us, and we couldn't really tell from where we were, but these were two-story buildings in front alongside the road. So we decided that if we get up into one of those buildings, we could see what was around us from that point of view. So Ray and I shot the lock off of the back door, one of the houses, went up into the upstairs, and there were two big windows right alongside the road, and three German tanks came down the road, and one of them stopped right in front of our house, right in front of where we were. They were French Renault tanks that the Germans were using. And the turret opened, and this German stood up in the tank, and he's looking around to see what's going on. So I handed Ray a gammon grenade, took the cap off and handed it to him, and he dropped it right in front of this German inside the tank. Well, the tank was like an eggshell. It was out of action. And when that happened, of course, the other two tanks started looking around to see what blew up this other tank. They didn't know that we were up there. But we took off from that building and went out behind the building, and then that's the time that I wondered, because I just knew those tanks were going to come back there. We had nothing to wipe them out with. If we didn't get above them so that we could throw a gammon grenade inside, we had no chance. But the tanks didn't know where the explosive came from, and they took off, went on down the road. And we were greatly relieved. But during the time that we were wondering what they were going to do, that's when I was thinking of this monument there at my hometown. So, because I had some time to think. It doesn't pay to have time to think. You get depressed.
So take us through the rest of the day. It's probably about midday by now, huh?
Yes, it's by now it's right at noon, and we figured out where we were by talking to a couple of the Frenchmen there. We knew then that we were in Bouzeville, and across the river from a town called Bouzeville-la-Bastille. This little village that we were in was Bouzeville, and we knew now that Chef Dupont was straight ahead to our right, across some causeways. So we started moving in that direction, and every time we would move from one hedgerow to the other, we were fired at from both ends by the Germans. We crossed all of the hedgerows down to the next road, and we only lost one person in that operation. Had a couple of them wounded. But we got down to the next crossroad, and every time we moved in any direction, they opened up with machine guns. So we couldn't go. We were surrounded on two sides by the river, and we couldn't go out that way because they were across the river and could see us. And the other two sections was a road this way and a road this way. And there was a house at the corner of that crossroad. We got to that last hedgerow, and that's as far as we could go. And we stayed there 5 days. The Germans had that house, and we were firing at it, trying to get rid of them so we could go on. And in the middle of the afternoon, we heard an American voice yelling, "Stop shooting or they're going to kill us." Well, then we realized that they had prisoners over there, some of our men as prisoners. And so we stopped firing for a while. And after about an hour and a half, I would say, they started shelling us with mortar shells. And so we started firing back. But they had evidently moved the prisoners out of there by that time and taken them down the road somewhere else, because we heard no more from our prisoners. Since that time, I met the gentleman who lived at that corner. He was a 14-year-old boy at that time. His name is Pierre Cotel, and I thought that the prisoners were in the house, but the prisoners were laying on the ground out in front of the house at the edge of the barn lot, and that's where they yelled at us from.
Now, your objective was what exactly? Was to take the...
Our objective was to take that bridge at Bouzeville-la-Bastille, and it was already blown up. It got blown up the evening of the first night, the second night of the night of June the 6th. It got blown up, not the night that we jumped, but the next night. And so then we were going to move on to the town of Chef-du-Pont, which was another one of our objectives, but we couldn't get there. We stayed in that field for 5 days, and we were attacked many times by the Germans during that 5 days, but they never did drive us out of there. We made our own code that we weren't going to give up. We were going to stay there regardless, and Ray Hummel and I decided that. We were in the same hole. We dug foxholes there along the hedgerows, with some of us on this hedgerow and some of them back here, so that we were some facing one way and some facing the other, and Ray and I had the road covered to our left. And between he and I, we decided that we didn't want to give up. And we passed the word down the line, and no one wanted to give up, so we were determined to stay there. And we stayed for 5 days. We could hear fighting all around us, gunfire of all different kinds, and you can recognize the German rifles from the American rifles, the automatic weapons particularly. And they were getting closer to us coming across the causeway from the town of Chef-du-Pont, so we knew that things were looking better from that direction. At least we had some friendly people headed in our direction. And the afternoon of the 5th day, we saw this platoon of men from the 90th Division. And the first words we heard was the sergeant yelling for him to bring up a bazooka. And that's not exactly the way he asked for it, but that's what the message was. And they were using that bazooka to drive the Germans out of that house, and they did. When he yelled, "Bring up that bazooka," all of us stood up and cheered. Well, of course, he thought we were all going to be shot on the spot because we were right out in the open. But at that point, we were so happy to see people it didn't really matter, because we were out of ammunition. We had down to our last 1 or 2 clips. And we couldn't have made it much more. We wouldn't have made it that night.
The hedgerows were a particularly difficult obstacle to overcome. Tell me about fighting in those things.
Those hedgerows, some of them were 6 foot tall, and they're 6 foot thick this way, and very difficult to go through. You have to go around them. In most places, it would take they did use bulldozers to knock holes in them. But even a bulldozer had problems. An ordinary man with a little trench knife had no chance of getting through there, not quickly.
And you were fighting just from field to field, or
yes.
What was that like? Because
from one hedgerow to the next. It was very difficult. And the Germans were good soldiers. They weren't just a bunch of scout troops out there on a problem of some sort. They were good soldiers, and they had good equipment.
Now, did you have any idea what was happening on the beaches or anywhere else in this whole invasion at all?
We knew that there was a lot of firing going on, but we had no way of knowing what was going on or who was winning what. We could tell that our gun sounds were getting closer to us, but for the first day, it was just utter confusion. And I guess the feeling that all of us had there in that field was just pure frustration, because there weren't enough of us to overrun the Germans there on this crossroad, and we didn't have the right kind of equipment. If we could have had access to the equipment bundles and gotten some bigger guns, if we could have had a couple of machine guns and a mortar or two, and maybe a BAR, we could have really done some good. But we did all right with what we had, but we could have done a lot better. We could have kept going, I think, if we'd had more equipment.
But those bundles were lost in the
Yes.
drop in the water.
Yes.
Now, when did you find out? When did you feel like, gee, this invasion might have worked? When did you get that sense?
When I realized that they were getting closer to where we were, then I knew that it was working.
And
I felt that it was, anyway.
And that was when about?
It was about the third day, and I could tell that they were getting closer.
It's a little bit of a relief there.
Yes, but they weren't close enough yet for me to feel really secure.
When did that come?
On the fourth day, I guess, because then I could tell that they were very close. And they were in the town of Chef DuPont that day, and coming our direction.
Now, did you go through San Mariglis in any way?
I didn't go through there until the night of June the 13th. I got wounded and was hauled back through there in an ambulance. So
Oh, okay.
that was my only time through St. Mariglis during the war.
Let's talk about your the fighting mid part of June where you got wounded. What were those circumstances?
We had gotten back to the unit on the night of the 11th, and on the morning of the 13th, we were to cross the Douve River back where I had been in this field, and the 1st Battalion went to the right and the 2nd Battalion went to the left to secure some more of the Norman Peninsula. And before we got to the town of Coigny, I was in a building, and the building got hit by an 88 shell and blew me out of it. I didn't get very little shrapnel. I got a lot of rocks from the wall that stuck in my back, but very little shrapnel, but I was really banged up. I didn't realize it, but I didn't know it really until 1950 when I got home. I'd been home 5 years, and my left arm went completely numb, and went to the VA hospital and found out my neck had been broken, and that's when it had to have happened. And because my arm didn't work right after that from then on.
So all that time you had a fractured neck. Gee. So then you had just been fighting small engagements throughout that period?
Yes.
Landing and...
The Germans were pretty much on the run by that time. There was a lot of stiff resistance here and there, but only just a few to slow us down.
Now let's talk about, you returned, San Mariglis, probably went back to England and...
Yes, I went back to the beach and I was there overnight and back to England the next day.
'50th anniversary coming up.
Yes.
What do you think is being celebrated or commemorated? How do you characterize this reunion?
It's just a landmark. 50 years is a long time, and the peace has lasted that length of time. And I think that there are probably many reasons that they're doing this. The main reason is to recognize the fact that the world put down someone like Adolf Hitler in his efforts to take over the world.
Hill remarked how they had climbed into those transport planes as innocent young boys and were then forced to grow up in one night. Hill and his friends brought home more than just memories. They carried lifelong scars, the kind you don't necessarily see on the body. Combat had changed them all.
What do you remember about those guys that didn't make it? What do you think about them?
I think of them quite frequently. Well, in Normandy, for example, my battalion commander, my company commander, my first sergeant, and many from my platoon were wiped out, killed. And I often wonder what would have happened to Martin Joseph Tehan, for example. He was a very likable young fellow from New York. Always happy, always singing, and very intelligent. And he was killed about the first day. And I always wondered what would have happened to Marty if he had lived through all that. And Captain Ruddy, my company commander, was, I guess, the finest gentleman I ever met in the Army. He was an old Army man who would, any of his men would have followed him anywhere, and he got killed the first day. We didn't really get to know our battalion commander that went to Normandy with us because he had just been transferred in, but he just barely got on the ground and was killed the first day. My platoon leader, who traded places with me, got shot through the stomach and captured the first day. I still think I saw him this month, or earlier. Well, I saw him last month in March at a company reunion. And every time I see him, I thank him for trading places with me because he's got that extra hole in his stomach and he's got a lot of problems that I don't have. But I often think of the men. At church during silent prayer time, I always offer a silent prayer for them.
Do you think it was worth it?
Well, if we hadn't have done it, life wouldn't be the same here now, because the Germans would have taken over this part, just as they did in Europe. So I guess it was worth it.
You see all their faces in those big company pictures, the photos of the group together, and what do you see in their faces, in their eyes?
I'll remember all of the happy times we had. We had a lot of good times, a lot of fun before the real invasion. And I think back at those times and have a few laughs. When we all get together, we still compare notes. Like last year, for example, at our company reunion, one of the guys showed up for the first time, and I told him in the room there that John Crouch was coming, and one of the guys says, "Oh, I borrowed £1 from him in England, and I still owe it to him." And we didn't realize that £1 was worth $4.12 at that time. So before John got to the room, this guy had his $4.12 out, and he gave it to John and says, "Now we're even. Quit dunning me." Well, he had never seen him in 40 years. But John took the $4.12 home and framed it. So we get many things like that. But it's I refer to them as my family. They're closer than family, really. It makes you appreciate life more, that's for sure. And it makes you appreciate the friends that you have more. Hopefully it makes you a better person. I hope it did. They gave up their most precious gift, their life, for their country. They were, well, when we go back over there, the French, for example, refer to us as heroes, but we're not the heroes. The heroes are laying there in St. Laurent Cemetery. I'm not at all sure why I was spared. I've said many times that God was looking after me. He had something else in mind for me. I don't know what. I hope that I've done some good in my lifetime, and enough good to make it all worthwhile. But someone was watching after me. It wasn't my time.
What would you say to your enemy, your former enemy, the guys who are on the other side of those hedgerows, if you could see them today?
I've met some, and it's a strange feeling to meet the first one. But after that, I realized that they were just doing their job the same as I was. And I survived because maybe I was better trained than they were, or I was more fortunate than they were. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. They were good soldiers. Their cause was not good. The reason that they were there was not good, but they were doing the same thing for their country that I was doing for mine, and they thought, I'm sure, that it was the right thing to do. Not all of them thought that, because we had some who were glad to give up, but they lost a lot of good men just as we did. They lost more than we did. And in fact, at times we've gone there and put a wreath in the German cemetery. They were good soldiers. Those people who were out there fighting us were just like we were. They weren't the ones that caused all of it. The ones that caused it were Adolf Hitler and his henchmen. There's no place for them, but they're going to be around forever. It looks like we're destined to have someone like that in the world no matter what's going on. They're not happy with things as they are. They've got to have more power, they've got to have more of this and more of that.
What do you think about when you see a paratrooper, when you're on the ground, you see a guy jumping from a plane? You want to be up there with him?
It's a good feeling. I go regularly to Fort Benning every year and watch the graduating class make their last jump, and it's a good feeling. I think if things were different, if my neck hadn't been broken and didn't have so many other problems, I probably would be trying to make it again. I would be glad to go with them, yes. It'd be a different experience. It just proves that once you're an idiot, you never get over it, I guess.
After the war, O.B. Hill went to college at the University of Evansville in Indiana and got his degree in accounting. He landed a job at Hughes Aircraft in Southern California, where he worked until his retirement in 1986. Years earlier, he had founded the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment Association and spent a lot of his retirement organizing reunions and ensuring that the memories and accomplishments of his fellow paratroopers wouldn't be forgotten. O.B. Hill passed away in June 2002. Margaret, his wife of 62 years, was at his side. Today in Normandy, there is a big stone memorial dedicated to O.B. Hill and a street named for him in Chef DuPont. We thank him for his gallant service and for sharing his story with us.
Step back in time and discover the untold stories of history's greatest heroes. From ancient civilizations to modern times, the Anthology of Heroes podcast takes you on a journey through history, uncovering the bravery and determination of those who stood up for what they believed in. These aren't just stories from old history books, they're the human experiences of those who fought for justice, freedom, and their principles. From the defiance of Vercingetorix as he stood against Rome, to the unwavering spirit of Skanderbeg as he faced down the Ottoman Empire, each episode is a journey through their life as we follow their triumphs and their failures. Meticulously researched with quotes and observations from primary sources, Anthology of Heroes is the perfect blend of expert research and engaging storytelling. So listen and subscribe now on your favorite podcasting app.